Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. So, welcome to this morning's event. Thanks so much for making it here today. I'm Louis Myers from the Payment Systems Regulator. So, you'll know from all of the correspondence that we've had with you that there are lots of things happening this morning. As last year, this first session will also be joined online by stakeholders. So welcome to everybody who's tuning in online as well. And before I introduce Aidene Walsh, the PSR's chair, just a couple of notices to run through. So you'll know that we've got a variety of discussions happening this morning. The agenda, along with all of the information about the breakouts for today, can be found on the back of your name badge. So we'll let you know as soon as you can move on to the next session. But after all of the panel discussions, you can have a good lunch with us and a nice chat to talk about the rest of what's coming up in payments for the year. So in each of the breakout rooms, you can also get involved digitally. We're capturing feedback in real time. So please, when you get into the room, in the bottom of the screens, there will be a QR code. So if you want to take part, then do. As you will probably have guessed, we are filming this morning as well, and we've got a photographer. So if you don't wish to have your photograph taken, please let us know, and we'll make sure that, that you aren't papped. And finally, if you've got any questions throughout the course of the day, just look out for someone with a PSR badge, and we'll be able to help you. So, Aidene Walsh, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Louis. Welcome and thank you all for attending today's event. I think the fact that we have the largest attendance to date recognises the ever-increasing importance of payments to domestic and global growth and the pace of change that we're currently all seeing on the payments ecosystem. At a recent speech with leaders across the payments ecosystem, Chris talked about the fact that in the UK, we are still on a journey to moving to a model where we can readily support innovation, being able to quickly deploy new technology and adapt rules for the benefits of stakeholders overall, even if it acts against the interests of some participants. It is imperative that our payment systems continue to modernise and change at pace, and that the markets that they support continue to develop, promote competition and drive innovation if the UK is to remain as a recognised world-class leader in payments. This is important for consumers, businesses, financial institutions, fintechs, and the wider economy. In fact, all of us across the payments ecosystem. Progress in the UK payment systems requires a mix of competition, collaboration, and clear decision-making, underpinned by effective economic regulation. Today is an important opportunity to discuss the PSR's priorities for this year. At the halfway point of our 5-year strategy, this is not only a year of strong delivery for the PSR with your support, but also a chance to reflect on the horizon with continued developments in technology, be it AI, big tech, digital pound, distributed ledger technology, to name a few, and increasing global interoperability. How we address these issues will be a key focus of our mid-year strategy review. Over the last year at the PSR, we have been developing our capabilities, building out our teams, including new executives and non-executives, and have recruited to ensure that we have the people and resources we need to deliver and meet our objectives of supporting competition, protecting end users, and promoting critical innovations at pace. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Chris, the wider PSR team, and the PSR board, many of whom you will have the opportunity to meet today, for their continued hard work and dedication to achieving these outcomes for UK payments. In-flight projects will have a huge impact on UK payment systems, including major changes to help address fraud and build user confidence. After all, without consumer trust, we simply will not see the sustainable innovation we all want to see. Chris will say more about these projects shortly. The necessity of collaboration to enable success in policy delivery is growing, whether this is in respect of fraud, which requires action across sector boundaries, with government and with the private sector, or other important projects. We continue to work together to deliver an end-to-end approach. Another focus for collaboration is meeting the challenges and opportunities presented by new technology. As recently announced, we are working closely with the FCA to improve our understanding of the issues raised by the growth in digital wallets. And indeed, many of us are engaging with HMT on the National Payments Vision to help shape the future of UK payments. Of course, we cannot do all of this without all of you. Ongoing engagement and dialogue with you all is absolutely crucial to our work. As an independent regulator, we will not always agree with everything we hear. That is entirely normal, particularly so where we want to see changes which are critical to improving outcomes. But we do listen, and we do value an open and constructive dialogue. And we want to see even more of that as we continue to develop our approach to more strategic engagement. This annual event is a key opportunity for all of us to engage, and I hope that you really enjoy the sessions. Through working together and delivering on our commitments, we can help ensure that the UK payment system is well positioned to deliver now and into the future. And with that, I would now like to welcome Chris.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Aidene. So it's really excellent to see so many of you here in person this morning, and thank you very much to those of you that are also joining online. As Aidene was saying, these events are such a great opportunity for us to come together, discuss priorities, and of course, understand the challenges and opportunities ahead. We'll also be outlining through the course of the day elements of our plan for the year, and of course, talking about what is around the corner, what is on the payments horizon. Now, why are we doing this? Well, payments are vital. They're vital for all of our lives. And in the last year, people in the UK made around 46 billion payments worth over £109 trillion. Those payments and the systems that they rely on move money from A to B, but they are essential to all of our daily lives. We rely on them as individuals, but they also support businesses, government, and the wider economy. So to put it simply, it is really important that they work well. And actually, in UK payments, many aspects of UK payments do in fact work really well, as Aidene has already noted. But there is more still to do to support innovation, competition, and to protect consumers. We're at a key point in our 5-year strategy, and we've now put in place many of the building blocks. So this year is increasingly around delivering on our significant ambition for changes in ways that will improve payment outcomes. And what do we mean by outcomes? Well, it's improve things that matter to people and businesses. Now, one area here is, of course, addressing the harm caused by authorised push payment fraud, APP fraud. And it is and will remain a critical focus for us. And of course, rightly so. They can have a devastating impact on people, but it also undermines trust in the whole payments ecosystem. So we've set out our requirements, and we are now fully focused on making sure that there is delivery and that we have appropriate implementation on the 7th of October this year. This will lead to a step change in consumer protection, but it will also lead to a step change in the incentives to prevent fraud from happening in the first place. It is an ambitious programme, and there have, of course, been strong views about it. But this debate has helped. It has helped us refine our proposals and improve how this is going to work. But already, we can see it is making a difference. We can see those incentives are increasing the focus on fraud prevention. And we all want to see the outcome of better protected consumers and less fraud. So we will play our part. We will continue to work closely with all of you, to engage with you in the coming months, to make sure that these world-leading changes take place on time and in the right way. In the year ahead, we will also continue our work to improve competition in payments. And in particular, a focus will be to drive through the changes to unlock open banking in payments. And while we are seeing encouraging growth in the use of account-to-account payments, this is an area where there is even greater potential. Not just as one that offers users more choice and more control over how to pay, but one that can, in time, provide greater choice and competition in retail payments. And we're also continuing to tackle areas where we have been addressing concerns on how competition is working today. So we are monitoring, and we will continue to monitor the improvements that we put in place to make it easier for merchants to switch between their card acquiring providers, service providers. And we, of course, will continue our work on our 2 market reviews on card fees, both of which have important upcoming milestones. So taken together, these projects represent a significant push towards supporting effective competition. And that's important given the potential that competition has to deliver innovation, value-adding products and services to businesses and people. But as Aidene was talking about, in recent years, we have also been increasing our focus on the future. We need to keep a close eye on these developments in what is a fast-moving sector. And it's absolutely essential that we monitor these developments, engaging broadly with the ecosystem as we do so. And this is important because it helps us understand our role. It helps us understand the impacts of new technology and business models on our work and our priorities. Now, in January 2022, we set out our 5-year strategy. That provided much needed clarity about our view on the challenges and opportunities in payments. And it also set out our strategic priorities and actions to address them. At that time, we committed to reviewing this strategy at the halfway point to ensure that the priorities remain the right ones, or whether we need to flex and adapt them. So we are now at that halfway point. So this will be an additional focus for the year ahead, something that Dan, our head of strategy, will be talking about more shortly. So yes, this is a significant year for us, not just for the delivery of our strategic priorities, but increasingly for the benefits that that will bring in terms of improved outcomes for people and businesses. So this morning is a really important opportunity to discuss what's coming up, to hear your views, to discuss your questions. And this year we have made the sessions more discussion focused following your feedback from previous events. We want to hear from you, so I really encourage you, participate in those sessions, download the QR code, put your hand up, engage in the debate. That, I think, is why you probably all come here, to have that fun and that conversation rather than listen to me now. So your input, your ideas, your challenge really does help us. It helps us tackle the important agenda that we have in front of us in order to improve those outcomes. So with that, thank you again for joining us. And we will get straight on with our first session, which is our panel session with the executive team. So with that, I'll invite the executive team up onto the stage. But I will also note that Natalie is not here. But you can come up. I'm filling while you come up. So Natalie is our Chief Operating Officer. She's on leave, currently, I think, going down the Danube on a boat, I think. So she's not here with us. But other than that, you have our full executive team. And with that, I'll hand over to Dan, I think. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Thank you very much, Aidene. So this is our Heads of Department panel. So this is our opportunity to drill down into some of the areas that we've already been talking about today. So what we'll do is we'll give a perspective from each of our own particular areas. But absolutely, as Chris says, there will be an opportunity for discussion, for questions at the end. And we really do welcome those questions and those points of discussion throughout. So we'll go down the line, starting with me, but save up your questions as we're going through. So first of all, I'm Dan Moore. I'm Head of Strategy, Analysis and Engagement at PSR. And I'm relatively new to the wonderful world of payments. I've only joined relatively shortly. And I'm really grateful for all of the support and help that so many people have given me as I've joined this really interesting sector. And I really welcome the continued engagement and discussion with you all in the coming months. So I wanted to give a few points of emphasis from my area, just to give you a sense as to what's on my agenda at the moment. So on the strategy agenda, and Chris has already mentioned it, I think this is a really important year in the sense that we are now looking at our 5-year strategy. We really do want to hear from you as we're conducting our mid-strategy review. Are the priorities that we've set out the right priorities, but also below the surface, below the high-level priorities that we've set out, are there areas that you think, actually, we think we should be looking into this in more detail, that into more detail? So we've already started some engagement on this. And I'd really encourage everybody, go to the PSR website. There's a beautiful little survey already up there, which gives you the opportunity to provide some views. But that's not the only means. Come to me, come to the team if you'd like to participate in that. As I say, we'll be doing more engagement. We've already heard about the National Payments Vision work, which HM Treasury is taking forward at the moment. Very closely engaged with Treasury on that work, and we're very much looking forward to the publication of the vision later this year, and particularly to see how it addresses some of those points about providing guidance to the overall sector. So beyond that, we've also heard a lot about the future, about the horizon. So we have reset our horizon scanning process over the course of the last couple of months. And what we're trying to do is to take a much broader range of sources to understand what are the big issues on the payments horizon which we should be considering and which could impact on how we do our work. There's a session this afternoon called The Future of Payments, or which we will say a little bit more on. But some of the themes are ones that we've already talked about the role of big technology, about the role of artificial intelligence, about digital ID, about a number of changes in technology and business models which could impact on payments in the future. This is a big focus for us because we're not just interested in payments today, we're really interested in those things which could impact upon payments and how users experience payments over the course of the next several years. Beyond that, I'm particularly proud of some of the work we've been doing to develop our team over the course of the last year. I'm thrilled that we have two new Deputy Chief Economists in place to really bolster our economics function even more, so we can focus further on data, we can focus further upon our approach to things like cost-benefit analysis, to economic appraisal. All of those areas, I think, are really, really positive things for the PSR as an independent economic regulator. And then my final area is communications and engagement. I think you've probably heard the basic story so far from Aidene and from Chris. We are serious. We are really serious about collaboration. We're really serious about our approach to engagement. We do want to hear from you. We do want to work with you. It's absolutely the case that as independent economic regulator, there's two things. We'll not always agree, but also within the room, you won't always agree with one another. Quite often you won't. That's what happens in good, well-functioning markets. There's tension. There's a degree of disagreement, but what we absolutely want to do is we want to keep working with you, to keep listening. Events like this are really important, but over my first couple of months, the sheer number of events that PSR is at, trying to have that conversation, listening, engaging, we've got a huge amount more over the course of the year. We want to see that very much continue. So those are a couple of my priorities: pressing on the strategy, developing further our analytical capability, and also that really important point about communications and engagement. So those are a couple of thoughts from me. Save up your questions on those points, but before we get to questions, I'm going to hand over first to our excellent Head of Policy, Kate.
Thank you, Dan. Brilliant. Fantastic. And while Dan is doing all of those things in strategy and communications, in the policy team, we are focused on delivering the strategy that Chris referenced, that we published in January 2022. So I will do a very, very quick whistle-stop tour through the work that we're doing in policy, the work that we've done, and also a look ahead about what's coming up this year. And I'm hoping that most of these themes will be familiar to many of you. It is a portfolio of ambitious projects, and we've really appreciated the insight that we've gained as we've progressed these pieces of work. In particular, that insight from our stakeholders through numerous roundtables and responses and meetings on, for example, APP fraud, on VRP through our industry working group, through our conversations and our consultations, and on our card market reviews, where we've had ongoing engagement and insight from our stakeholders, which has really helped us to better understand the environment, the views, the constraints that the industry is facing into. And that helps us to better tailor our policy proposals. So talking about each of those quickly in turn, if I may, Chris has already talked about the work that we're doing on APP fraud, and we've taken significant steps this year on our work to reduce and to mitigate APP fraud. So we published our final policy statement last June, and then our final policy parameters last December. What that means is that 2024 is a huge year of implementation on APP fraud. And we are looking forward to that October deadline, when the reimbursement rules will come into play. And we're working extremely closely with Pay UK and the industry on readiness for that reimbursement coming in. Now, October's already a busy month because confirmation of payee. At that point, we plan to get to 99% coverage on our COP directions as well. And 99% will be a huge achievement for that rollout of COP, which we have staggered over the years. But that really gives us a much, much better platform to start tackling fraud in other ways as well. It's worth just mentioning, if I may, that there have now been over 2 billion COP checks. And that's a really big milestone that we're quite proud of, and Pay UK, I know, are very proud to have done that. Staying on app fraud for a moment, we published performance data. That was back in October last year. We have another set of performance data almost ready to go, so expect to see that second set of data, which we've already gathered and we're working with, and expect to see that in the summer. What those reports do really well is bring transparency and focus on how firms are doing at protecting their customers. And we think that's a really important insight into what's going on in the world of APP fraud. We continue to support the need for investment in our central infrastructure. And as per the original outcomes of the MPA on fraud and access and competition, that all remains the same. That absolutely remains at the heart of our strategy, and those are things that we still want to achieve with the central infrastructure progress. Now, while work is paused on the MPA, we've continued our conversations with the Treasury, with the bank, and with Pay UK to ensure that the necessary work can continue while we await the national payments vision, which Dan has already mentioned. So the programme is paused, but the work is still continuing in that space. We've also been working closely with the FCA as their role on the access to cash increases, and looking at digital payments and getting some really insightful input from our customer survey, which we intend to publish soon. But if I may, I'll turn to our focus on competition, where, as Chris has already mentioned, we've been putting a lot of energy into the JROC work and into pushing forward open banking. And in particular VRP, variable recurring payments, which we think can be a real big step forward towards better competition for retail transactions. Now, we chaired an industry working group. Some of you in the room were on that working group. We chaired that for the second half of last year, and we brought together the whole ecosystem. And that helped us to really understand where we might need to take steps or consider regulatory intervention, and indeed where, importantly, there is industry consensus and we don't need to consider intervention at all. And what we really want this year is for that industry consensus to bring momentum and progress towards better outcomes for this fantastic new way of making payments. We are now working with Pay UK and OBL and UK Finance on the next stages of this project, but we want industry to lead the way forward where they can. Meanwhile, we're considering the input that we've had on our consultation, which is around the commercial model for VRP and around whether mandation is required. So that's a big focus for us this year. Chris also quickly mentioned our work on our card fees reviews. We published our interim report on cross-border interchange fees in December, and we're now considering the inputs that we've had on that. And then our provisional findings on the market review into scheme and processing fees is due later this month. So that's one to watch out for as well. So overall, in policy, we have a really challenging portfolio of work. We're committed to quite an ambitious delivery programme, and that is focused on improving outcomes for users of payment systems in the UK. Now, we recognise that that needs input and energy from industry to support this range of ambitious initiatives. And I want to say thank you to everyone who has input and engaged with us on all of this work. It will continue to make a huge difference to the payments that underpin the UK economy and to everyone who uses payment systems. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much indeed, Kate. So as you can hear, a huge amount of really impactful, really important work in that particular area. Just to quickly call out, we do have the QR code there. So if you do want to leave any particular comments or questions, in addition to raising your hand, that's going to be up in all of the sessions. So please do use it. Excellent. So you've heard a lot about the existing projects. I'm going to hand over to Oliver now to say a bit about a really important developing function in supervision compliance monitoring.
Thanks, Dan. Morning, everybody. I'm Oliver, Head of Supervision and Compliance Monitoring. Joined the PSR in June last year, having spent 20 years previously working in legal services where I regulated barristers. I don't know if there are any barristers in the room, but it was always quite disconcerting when I came and talked at events like this, where barristers were in the room, because they focused so much on my advocacy as opposed to what I was actually saying. So hopefully you will be a bit of an easier audience. So I was brought in to set up a new division with a particular focus on supervision and on compliance monitoring. And I think that reflects a broadening out of the approach that PSR is taking to regulation, a recognition that you need to have a wide range of tools available to you when you're regulating. And I had the luxury, I guess, a fairly unusual luxury of starting from a blank sheet of paper and largely having the opportunity to build a team from scratch. The enforcement function that was already existing within the PSR moved over to me, but it has given me the opportunity to ensure that in establishing a team, I've got a wide range of expertise, experience, diversity of perspective. That is, I think, is really important when you're building a new team from scratch. So I think we're sort of breaking new ground as a regulator by having this new division. So if I just talk briefly about each of the three areas that I've got responsibility for, starting with supervision, which is common territory for most regulators, perhaps less common for economic regulators, but certainly conduct regulators, there's a lot of supervision in place. And for me, supervision is about developing strategic relationships between the regulator and the regulated, so that as the regulator, we understand the nature of the organisations that we regulate. We understand how they make decisions. We understand how they manage risk, how they identify opportunities, how they ensure they've got the right capacity and capability to deliver. And so that for me is a really important aspect of supervision. What we are doing is, through supervision, setting out very clearly what our expectations are of payment systems operators. And we've issued a call for views in the last 2 or 3 weeks, which give a bit more detail to the approach that we're proposing to take. Really keen to get people's perspectives on that. We've done quite a lot of engagement already, and that has shaped our thinking on, as it's set out in the call for views. But do please take the opportunity to respond to that. It's not set in stone. This is a work in progress. Really keen to get people's perspectives on how they see that working. I think if we get, so that often I hear when I'm talking about supervision, the concern about, well, is this going to create extra regulatory burden? I think if we get supervision right, it shouldn't. It will feel different because it's new, but if we are building our understanding of how organisations are operating, it hopefully means that we can be more efficient in how we're engaging. It means that we're more coordinated in the engagement that we're having. So I'm hopeful, and I think I would say that, wouldn't I? But I'm hopeful that it will reduce regulatory burden rather than add to it. But I am very mindful of the broader regulatory landscape. I'm very mindful of how the FCA are operating in this space. I'm mindful of the Bank of England operating in this space. And I'm very keen to avoid duplication and to find opportunities for efficiency wherever possible. There will be overlap. I mean, that's inevitable, but it's being aware that there's overlap and how we manage that. And I'm talking a lot to the bank and to the FCA to make sure that we are as aligned as we need to be and that there are opportunities for efficiency. So that's supervision. Monitoring is much more common, much more territory for all regulators. It's about ensuring that the specific directions, the general directions that we have issued are being complied with. But it's more than just a tick box exercise. This is not just have you tick the box in relation to compliance. What's really important is understanding whether the outcomes that we were trying to achieve through the policy that we introduced that led to those specific directions, whether those outcomes are being delivered. And so we want to hear from you as early as possible if you are facing challenges in compliance, so that we can talk through the steps that you're taking to get to compliance, so that we can take a more proportionate approach to addressing issues of compliance, rather than moving straight into enforcement. So it's about having that early conversation with us if you are facing difficulty in how you're going to comply with particular specific directions. A big focus for us this year will be on compliance around APP reimbursement requirements and making sure that Pay UK are monitoring compliance with those requirements effectively. It's a flagship policy for the PSR that incentivises both fraud prevention and customer protection. So it's really important that people are dealing with that in the way that we had intended. And then lastly, and I always come to this last, I've got enforcement responsibilities, really important. That regulators use enforcement where it's appropriate to do so for persistent or serious breaches. It acts as both an incentive and a sort of deterrent, but it also demonstrates the seriousness that we are placing on ensuring that people are meeting the regulatory requirements that we set. So I think for me, the main message to take away from this is we're setting out really clear expectations on payment systems operators. We're really keen to develop those strategic relationships across the sector. That requires openness and transparency from us, but also from you, so that we can develop the right kind of relationship. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Oliver. So a really important development there in our regulatory approach. And absolutely, again, this theme about collaboration, engagement and discussion. So with that, I want to hand over to our excellent General Counsel, Alex, to talk through some of our legal focus.
Thanks very much. So I'm a competition and public law specialist. I was actually in the audience here last year, but not appointed. I was heading up the National Security Investment Screening Unit for the Cabinet Office. So it's nice to be on the stage instead of at the back of the room where I felt very much like a newbie. I joined in June and I made it a priority to look very carefully at the ambition of the PSR, where it's going in terms of its portfolio of work, and ensuring that the legal capacity mapped across properly. I think in real terms, I have doubled the number of lawyers working in my team. And that has been a very deliberate exercise to ensure that each of these divisions are able to take through their work in the right way with the right legal support. And I'm pursuing an embedded model. So my lawyers are working in tandem with the policy colleagues, strategy colleagues, and enforcement colleagues, so that all our work is evidence-led, well-reasoned, procedurally fair, and it's building for the future. Building capabilities for the future has been my absolute priority. We've brought talent from across the FCA, the Competition and Markets Authority, central government, some litigators, the Gambling Commission, Cabinet Office. So we've got a range of skills, and that's important because of the range of work that you've heard about today. I shouldn't really labour the point, but I would like it to be clear that we work very closely as an executive, and that is modelled throughout our teams so that we follow a multidisciplinary matrix environment. The law is not an afterthought, it's absolutely in the fabric of everything that is being done. I think that's all I have to say.
Absolutely, and we do work very closely. We're not just putting this on for today. We do work very, very closely as an executive across all areas of the PSR's work. So with that, I'm going to ask Chris to say a few words, a little bit about the how we work, as well as some of the whats we've been talking about.
Perfect. Yes, it is exactly that how really. So the only thing, I was only really going to just focus on one extra thing. Something that could be missed if you're not working on certain projects is the extent that we work with, of course, all of you in the room and our stakeholders, consumer groups, business groups. But we also spend quite a lot of time working with our fellow public authorities. So we've talked about it a fair bit along the way. But that, of course, includes really close working with the FCA. So I jointly chair the Open Banking JROC group with Sheldon Mills at the FCA. But all our work on infrastructure renewal, for example, I think it's fair to say we meet weekly at least with the team at the Bank of England with that relationship with their focus on resilience, our focus on innovation, competition and other aspects of user protection. Just to give you a bit of an example of how I see that working, and I think a good example from the past is that I was just reflecting that I think that the first speech that I gave in this role as MD was about cash policy. So it's good 4.5 years ago, I think. And I was talking about the need for reform, what we're doing on ATMs, but also that broader need for reform of cash policy. What then followed was increasing close working with the FCA, then with Treasury on the legislation. And then here's the important bit. We've then started to step back. So the FCA has now got more powers, broader powers, can look from a retail banking perspective. And as a result of that, it has been mentioned actually, cash along the way today, but we are reducing our work here. So I think that's a really good example where we've contributed to the debate, work really closely with the FCA and with Treasury on the legislation, and then, of course, step back to prevent unnecessary overlaps. So that's the model we aim for. We're working with a number of other authorities on things like app scams. You know, I've spoken to Ofcom, there's the Home Office, we've got people joining the team from the Home Office. So there's, behind the scenes, there's a lot of collaboration across those boundaries, across the sort of public authorities, government and the regulators.
Excellent.
That's all I was going to say.
Thank you very much, Chris. You've heard a lot about the what's, about how we are developing as a regulator, the what's in terms of delivery and the huge focus on what we've delivered, but also what we're going to deliver in this year, but also a lot on the hows, the collaboration, the joint working, all of that good stuff. But you've heard enough from us now. It's over to you for questions, comments, anything you want to raise. We've got about 15 minutes or so. And online, I think you can add things to the chat and it will be picked up. So it's over to you. Who'd like to start us off with a question? I think we have roving mics, so don't worry about that. I can see one. Please.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, PSR team. If I read the newspapers at the moment around payments, it's all around things like fear about CBDCs, worry about using digital payments, nervousness about banking apps. So there's this kind of digital inclusion thing going on, which at Link we think could risk leaving maybe 5 million people stranded on cash and other analog traditional ways of doing stuff. What should be done about digital payments?
So I'll give a quick thought and then I'll hand over, Kate, to you. So I think this is a really important issue. So when we're thinking about things like our mid-strategy review, I think the focus of the mid-strategy review, or the strategy, was very much on, it was more on access to cash. And I think a really important area that we have to think about in the mid-strategy review a bit more is access to digital, so particularly for both the socially and digitally excluded, and particularly where that comes together, I think there's a particular set of issues. So I think there is something really important there. I think when it comes to things like, for example, central bank digital currencies and digital developments, one of the things we are trying very much, working with the bank and working with Treasury, is effectively making sure that issues of how these really important developments could impact upon a broad range of consumer groups, how they're taken into account, is a really important part of our advocacy. So one thing I would say, and I can say this genuinely since joining the PSR, is we don't just talk about consumers. We don't just sort of say, here's an end consumer. Very often we are trying to think about, well, what does this mean for particular consumer groups? What does this mean for inclusion? Those sort of questions. And I think that approach has to continue to be an important way about how we think about things. But Kate, do you want to give
shall I just say a couple of thoughts on that? Because exactly those points that you make, John, we've been thinking hard about in our work on digital payments and indeed access to cash. The work that we've done and the research that we've commissioned tells us quite clearly that actually using cash is a choice. So actually we've got some information which tells us that actually it's not so much about digital inclusion, but it's the choice to use cash and the choice to use cash around trust and control. So trust and control for us appear to be the things that we need to tackle to help people in this complex world of payments where, you know, they may be getting left behind. And the work that we've done actually makes us think that the work that we're doing on trust, so for example, on APP, making sure that payment systems can be trusted and that you're not worried about using your mobile app to make a payment, and also control. So VRP is a really good example of a payment product which gives consumers, particularly consumers without regular incomes, better control of payments that go out. So actually, we do think that embedded in the PSL strategy and some of our activities, driving forward some of the things that we are already doing on trust control, help that inclusion agenda.
Great. Thank you very much, Kate. Any other questions? I can see one just over here, please. I can see the microphone making its way. It's getting there. Very good. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Judith Crawford from the Electronic Money Association. Thank you for the panel. It's very helpful to hear the different divisions of the PSR and how you're developing. I'm speaking from the perspective of small and medium-sized PSPs. And I think it's very, looking at the 2022 plan and looking at where we are now, I can definitely see where you've progressed on certain areas like consumer protection, looking at VRPs, some of the cards work. I think one of the areas I'd be curious to hear a bit more about is some of the objectives around removing barriers to the development of new services that meet user needs, removing barriers to effective competition. So what are the, are there actions that you have in place, or, what actions do you match against those objectives that were in the plan? And I'll give you an example of an area that I haven't seen very prominently recently. So the PSR used to be responsible for access to bank accounts for PSPs. So this is, part of the payment services regulation. This is an ongoing headache for a lot of firms in this sector, and it's not getting better. Is this an area the PSR are looking to address or work with the FCA on? And then similar, connected to that is access to payment systems. Obviously, this is also sits with the Bank of England as well. But, these are things that are really important for our sector. And I don't see them prominently in what the PSR is doing. So I'm just wondering, is there work ongoing on that? Is it on the agenda?
Yeah.
And sorry, one point on engagement.
Please, pile on in.
A separate point on engagement. We very much want to engage with all the work the PSR does. I have to say, sometimes it's a bit difficult if you're a smaller association or you've got smaller members, the number of consultations. Yeah. So that's just one request to kind of coordinate a little bit. We've got about 5 deadlines due in the course of 5 days at the end of this month. So that's just one little...
No, and that's very much it. And I've heard that from others as well. So that is one of the sort of practical things that I think is something we're very, very conscious of. Not least because we do want to speak and we do want to hear from the broad payment sector, and it's quite difficult if you've got 5 or 6 consultations and one person trying to work. We totally get that. So, Kate, I was going to come to you on as well, unlocking competition, that angle. Now, I wonder if, Chris, you want to say a word about access. Kate.
Brilliant. Yes, so Judith, I can't see you, but I know you're there. Thank you for the question. I think we've already referenced quite a lot of the work that we're doing on competition, and I'm sure Chris will talk to kind of the journey that the PSR has been on, in particular in terms of access. But actually, at the heart of 2 things that we're doing, we think quite hard about competition. And in the VRP and the open banking work, we're really thinking very hard about how we make sure that new competition can really help the ecosystem and help consumers. So we come at it from that angle on competition, definitely. In terms of access, we, as I said earlier, we continue to support those key objectives of the MPA, which are around access and making sure that there is access to the payment system from a technical perspective, from a rules perspective, and indeed from a contractual perspective, as we look at the future of that central infrastructure. So I think that is going to be a really key focus for us this year. And of course, as we've already said, we are waiting for the national payments vision. But these are things that we're already thinking about and talking about.
Great, entirely.
Yeah, so two bills, particularly on that access thing, is that it was a real focus of the kind of early years of the PSR, and then I think we've now been in a phase where one of the things we've been trying to do is to make sure that the infrastructure itself is easier to connect to and is cheaper to connect to. Now, Kate, you talked about that, I think, in your remarks, but that is an outcome that we still are committed to. Obviously, where we're sitting today, the kind of path to get there is less clear, but that is certainly one part of the outcome in terms of the infrastructure and the rules that we want the systems at a technical level and then at a kind of governance rules level to be easier to connect to. And on that, I'd make two sort of observations as well, is that when Oliver talks about supervising payment system operators, one aspect of that is, are they complying with the directions, but are they accessible? So that is an area where if we have particular concerns, we can work with the PSOs to remedy and address those concerns and consider what to do. Now, on that, I can give you the assurance, Judith, we are doing things. Now, some of this is you won't see actually, because we do get complaints and issues brought to us, and I can give you the assurance that we do pick those complaints up, work with them, and some of them are then go quite a long way through our kind of governance in terms of investigations. That's probably about as far as I can go, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point, which is, I mean, there are some barriers which may be market or structural based, but some are behavioural. And as a concurrent regulator with enforcement powers for anti-competitive conduct, we actually are interested in hearing about behavioural barriers to effective competition. And we do have a pipeline. And we report to the Competition and Markets Authority every year on those. Some are resolved behind the scenes. And if we don't have a big antitrust investigation, it doesn't mean that we're not actually welcoming feedback on what may be the issues, and we look at them carefully and prioritise accordingly. So
I guess to boil that down, is if you have concerns in that area, do share them with us, because it is an area where we have powers, we have interest, and we, I can assure you, are doing work.
Oliver, did you want to say a word on that?
Well, I want to say something about the sort of consultation fatigue point, if I could, because I'm very mindful of that. And I think that we should be prepared to be flexible in how we are receiving feedback on consultations that we are issuing, so that, for example, we've got this supervision call for views out at the moment. If you want to send in a written response, that's fine. If you want to come and talk to us about it, share your views in a meeting, we're happy to take feedback in that way. So I think we need to recognise that there's a lot of consultation out there. There's an industry in itself within organisations to pull together responses. Obviously important to get written feedback, but equally we should be prepared to receive verbal feedback that we can agree. So we'll take a note of that conversation. We'll play that back to you, and to make sure that it accurately reflects what you're telling us, so that you're not having to always come to us with a written response. So certainly in relation to my supervision call for views, come and talk to us. Happy to take that in lieu of a formal written response, if that's your preference. So I think there's something about helping people to be flexible in how they provide their feedback to us.
Yeah, there's a bit of an offer there as well. So please. There we go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Colin Lyne from Fire, a digital payments business. And I just wanted to build on Judith's points and the discussion that we're having now. And I think that I would echo and support what's been said here. And I think I would encourage the PSR, as part of its review of its strategy, to look more broadly at the payments ecosystem, and to look at particularly the investor appetite into the sector. Because it's a very important kind of dimension, is that investors should be looking for opportunities and willing to risk capital to bring out new products and new services into the market. And that often relates to the accessibility of the market. And I think that there's a sense that some of the decisions that you've made have a disproportionate impact on the smaller businesses in the sector. And that, as well as creating problems for those firms, specifically themselves, where they now have to grapple maybe with new things that they didn't have to do before. They mightn't have the data sets, they mightn't have the experience. They certainly cannot engage in consultations.
Yes.
So they're not used to this type of setup, this type of having almost like a second regulator or a third regulator. And I think it's the impact on these firms that can sometimes, as I say, detract the investors and that's a really important aspect, I think, for the sector, is we have to make the payments market really attractive for an investable, and make it, and that does relate then to the accessibility of it. And it's great to hear that you're aware of many of the issues that these, what I would call startup or scale-ups, that they face. And I think there's Pay.UK are doing a great job trying to engage, but Pay.UK has to transition from being an organisation that was used to dealing with a small number of large players to now being an organisation that has to deal with a larger number of maybe smaller players. And that doesn't happen overnight. And they are doing great work to, with their engagement as well. So I think the engagement from yourselves and from Pay.UK is all very positive. But the practical side of that for a company that's maybe, 20, 30 people is really challenging.
Yes.
And I think it'd be good into the future to maybe see how you assess your decisions on that cohort within the community. Because my belief is that community, when you create startups, you have a very, very vibrant ecosystem.
Yes.
And there's consolidation and mergers and takeovers and so on. And the technology often is fed from those early stage companies into the larger organizations as well, which can be a very positive dimension to the ecosystem. There's just a comment really, just to echo what's been said.
I think it's an entirely fair comment as well. So it's really interesting to hear that, and particularly to put it in the context of our mid-strategy review and how we look at the future. I think it is fair to say, so one of the things I've been thinking about on taking on the communications and engagement role is in some sectors it's quite straightforward. You speak to about 3 people or 3 big organisations and you've covered most of the ground. There is a challenge in payments that it is it's a much broader ecosystem. There are hundreds of different companies operating, and there's a real challenge in making sure that we are hearing from all of those who have a really important perspective, and we're communicating in ways which enable them to engage back with us. I'm very conscious that if you're a startup, you don't have a regulatory affairs manager and you're not monitoring every piece of engagement. So one of the things I'm very, very keen to do is how can we make that a bit sharper? How can we make that a bit cleaner? I have to be realistic. We're not going to be speaking to thousands of different companies on a day-to-day basis. But I think the practical suggestions that all of us had about how we meet and how we discuss is really important. But this is something I'm really keen to also have views on, because I don't think this also should be PSR. We're going to define how we're going to engage. We absolutely will. But I also want to understand actually what's helpful. What are the events that it would be helpful? What are the forums that it would be helpful for us to talk to? What does good engagement look like from your perspective? So we definitely are able to hear and understand more of those sort of issues and those sort of implications. Anything else on that? No, let's have another question, please. I see.
I might be able to see him. But
I'm afraid I can't. I'm afraid you're right behind the... Oh, Tony, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I think we might be out of time after that.
Oh, my last one. Thanks for a great presentation of a coherent and integrated strategy. One of the most wonderful things about the payments industry, but equally its most dangerous, is its interconnectedness.
Yes.
Change in one thing often affects changes in something else. It's hard to see how the whole thing plays out. For example, the changes to the APP fraud policies that are coming through to be adopted by the 7th of October are likely to have an impact on the commercial viability of a whole host of companies in the payments industry providing accounts. I've heard estimates of between 20 and 40% of the companies currently doing that may either fail in the next 18 months or leave the UK. That reduces the competitiveness on the more established and larger players, and as a result is likely to affect the quality of investment and the likely impact on innovation. So my question for the PSR is, what are they doing? What are you doing to both recognise and monitor the interconnectedness between your 3 objectives of consumer protection, which may well be the impact of these new APP fraud policies, and competition and innovation? The first of these is likely to have a very significant and I believe negative impact on the latter 2 objectives.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Kate, would you like to pick
Brilliant.
up?
Yeah, I will do. Thank you, Tony. It's a really, really important point, and it's one that we have heard and talked about quite a lot through the development of our policy on APP fraud, and in particular, right through to those final parameters where we were looking at that reimbursement limit, where I know, we've had a lot of discussions about the appropriateness of that £415,000 limit, and whether some of those smaller firms, if they were impacted by a number of scams, would remain viable. So it's a really, really critical point. I think the thing I would say, and the thinking behind our policy, we actually think that having good fraud controls is just a requirement for entry into the sector. And we think that's absolutely critical for everybody, whether you're small or big. And we work with the FCA quite closely on those controls. And it is fair to say there are some firms out there who have got a way to go and have got some opportunities to improve those controls to prevent more fraud. And we do think that's really, really important. Having said that, we've heard the feedback and we recognise that the impact that the potential impact that some of those bigger claims can have. So we're doing a piece of work right now which helps us to understand the number of big claims there are likely to be, or there could be, and what their potential impact would be. So that's an area we're keeping very, very close eye on as we go into the reimbursement deadline. And we recognise the concern, so we'll keep looking at it.
And just conscious that we're being increasingly told to stop. But just a final thought on that, which is I think an area where maybe in the breakout sessions you can kind of help us is. So what next? So what can we do to kind of help and smooth that transition? So there are conversations around the sorts of services, fraud prevention data that Pay.UK could make sure is available centrally. So that's a really interesting debate because it acts to reduce barriers to entry. Is there anything else on access that we should be doing? Again, working on those sort of barriers to entry. And also what's next on APP. So when we've been talking through this process, we know that these rules are going to adapt and change over time. So I think whilst we do need to get that implementation right, we also need to keep an eye on what's next. How do we refine and improve? So I think maybe that's a particular kind of thing that I know we've got some sessions where this conversation will come up is how can we help firms? And there's a few suggestions that I've kind of referenced.
Yeah.
Dan, back to you.
So a lively set of questions there. That was really helpful. I know one or two of you also wanted to ask questions. Please do use the breakouts over the next couple of hours, but also use the breaks as well. We're all here. We're all very, very keen to pick up questions directly as well. So please do use those. So now for the breakout sessions. So look on your passers, the back of your passers, and it will have a code and it will tell you where you need to be. So if you've got A, go next door. If you're B, go downstairs in that direction. And if you're C, you don't have to do anything at all. Just stay sitting. So I hope you enjoy the breakout sessions and I hope you enjoy the remainder of the day. Thank you very much indeed.